Aloha, e komo mai, and welcome aboard. Welcome to this week's edition of our podcast entitled Just Cruisin'. I'm Larry Jackson, co-owner of Cruise Holidays of Viera, and I'll be your host on this week's podcast. And we are so glad you could be with us this week. We are recording on Thursday morning, October 22nd, 2020, so to give you a frame of reference. And the title of this week's podcast is We're Still in Limbo, and I Don't Mean to Dance. What's the definition of limbo? From the Merriam-Webster dictionary, they say it is a place or state of restraint or confinement, trapping travelers in an airless limbo. A place or state of neglect or oblivion, an intermediate or transitional place or state, a state of uncertainty. Well, that's us in the cruise industry. We are in limbo. Just to bring you up to date on exactly where we're at, today being October 22nd, we are a week away from the expiration of the CDC's no-sale order on October 31st. I'm sorry, we're a little bit over a week away. The October 31st no-sale expiration of the no-sale order. We are anticipating that that's either going to be extended or that's the end of it, and we can then begin resuming our operations. The cruise lines, all of the major cruise lines, are in a voluntary suspension through the end of November 30th, so they are not anticipating having any ships taking on passengers before November 30th. Now, at the beginning of this week, we had several rumors in our trade publications that there may be some large announcement coming this week about the CDC order, but nothing has been forthcoming, so we don't have any change as far as that's concerned. Which brings me back to the state of the cruise industry, which I've been telling you for several months now, is predicated on, it's basically a three-pillared or three-legged stool. The first leg of us resuming cruise operations is the lifting of the CDC's no-sale order. Number two is the ports of call, where we would be sailing to, what their reaction would be, whether they would let us go, what kind of restrictions they would put on us, and those kinds of things. And third, it would be you, the consumer, the cruiser, and whether you're going to be willing to go back aboard ships. Now, to mitigate some of the things in my three pillars or my three legs of my stool, first of all, the CDC, the Cruise Industry, Cruise Lines International Association, Norwegian Cruise Lines, in conjunction with Royal Caribbean's Healthy Sail Panel, delivered to the CDC a 66-page document with 74 items or protocols that they are willing to put into place in order to return to sailing. And we are awaiting approval, denial, extension, further requirements from those protocols, and that's really where we're at as far as that's concerned. Ports of call in the Caribbean, so they're kind of saying, okay, well, we'll kind of wait and see what happens, but we're thinking about allowing you guys back in. As far as you, the consumer, is concerned, I believe that there is a tremendous pent-up demand initially for you avid cruisers, for people who are okay with cruising. I'm not sure they're going to be willing to get back on board ships. And I think now one of our key issues as far as getting you, the cruisers, back onto our ships is going to be a vaccine. Whether the vaccine's effective or not, the fact that you have a vaccine and then you feel basically that you can't get the COVID-19 regardless of what happens on the ship, then that's going to make a big difference as to whether you're going to go on future cruises. So we kind of added another unknown in there, and that's the vaccine. So that's pretty much where we're at. What do I feel like is going to happen? I believe that the no-sale order will be lifted sometime soon, that we need between 60 and 90 days to get our ships up and operating again. But that's an unknown also. So I foresee us doing some experimental cruises out of Florida ports, Port Canaveral and Miami, with maybe just travel agents on board or maybe just crew members on board, then doing some short sailings, 3 or 4 day, maybe even 2 day sailings with passengers to see how the boarding process goes, how the protocols go, whether we have any outbreaks, and that taking place probably in the month of December through the end of December. Maybe in January, if we were very, very lucky, we may start to see the resumption of 7-day cruises going to ports of call in the Caribbean. Europe this summer, I think, is pretty much out. I don't think we're going to be able to sail there. We have a lot of problems with the ports of call. They are cruising in Europe right now, but it's basically out of Italy with only Italians on board and out of Germany with only Germans on board. I don't think the Europeans are going to let Americans into their countries anytime soon. So European sailings, I just don't see it happening until maybe late summer. One of our biggest unknowns is Alaska. And I have a report here that Holland America has just announced that they're going to be sending 6 ships to Alaska next year, which is huge because they normally only have 2 to 3 ships up there. I think a lot of that's because they're not going to be going to Europe. Now, we have a big unknown in Alaska from ports of call because the Canadian border is still closed. Canada will not allow any cruise ships in. And as you know, because of the Jones Act, we cannot go to Alaska unless we go to an international port, and that being Canada. So we end our cruises in Canada or at least stop in Victoria along the way to be able to fulfill the Jones Act requirement of having a... So the Alaska season is going. I did read an article this week from one of the congressional representatives from the state of Alaska. His name is Ron Jones, and one of the things that he's looking at doing is to get a waiver to the Jones Act if the Canadian ports don't open up again. That would allow us to cruise out of, let's say, Seattle into Alaska and back, and we wouldn't have to worry about the Canadian ports. That seems very unlikely that we're going to get that waiver. Now, just to give you a little history, what was it, 4 years ago when we had the very large hurricane that hit Maria, I believe it was, it started with an M anyway, that hit Puerto Rico, there was a waiver to the Jones Act to bring in relief supplies to the island of Puerto Rico. The Jones Act, just to refresh your memory, is the law, the 100-year-old law that prevents foreign flagged carriers or ships transiting to U.S. ports on an itinerary without having a stop at one international port somewhere along the line. So that's why for instance, most Hawaii cruises go to Ensenada on their way to Hawaii out of California and go back to California. Our Alaska cruises, again, start in Canada or stop somewhere in Canada. So we would need a waiver to be able to just go from, let's say, Seattle and back. Now, to further complicate things as far as Alaska is concerned, Seattle is not making any indications as to whether they're ever going to open up to cruise ships either. They are very fearful up there, apparently, of the COVID, and so they are making noises like they're not going to allow us to go out of Seattle either. But please don't let this deter you from making your plans to book an Alaska cruise next year. And I'm telling you some of the obstacles I see, but I think we can probably overcome them. I do believe we will be cruising in Alaska next summer. And I would urge you, because we are going to see a big demand up there, to start booking, or at least consider booking your Alaska cruise, get information on it now rather than waiting to when everything opens up and then all of a sudden the demand comes along. And along that lines, we at Cruise Holidays of Viera would like to be able to help you with that. We are a boutique travel vacation planning store located in Melbourne, Florida, which is near Port Canaveral, if you're not familiar with our geography. We've been in business for 17 years now. The agency is owned by myself and my wife, and we have one assistant, Wendy. And we are a boutique travel planning store, which means you get very personalized attention. We have a great deal of experience when it comes to cruising in Alaska, either by planning cruises, going there for 17 years, or having traveled there ourselves. At least, I think it's 7 or 8 times we've traveled and been to cruises on Alaska. So we know the territory very well, the state very well, and we would love to be able to give you that expert advice when you're planning your cruise, because what we can offer you is advice on what cruise lines to choose, what itineraries to choose. The itineraries in Alaska can be daunting when you first look at them online, but you don't need to spend that time and confusion worrying about, do I start in Vancouver and end in Seattle? Do I do a round trip Seattle? Do I do 7 days? Do I do a cruise tour where I combine land with cruise, a land tour with a cruise? All of those we can help you with and walk you through the process so that you don't have to spend hours or any time on the internet and then wondering whether you made the right decision. You can contact us at Cruise Holidays of Viera by calling us at 321-242-1331. You can go to our webpage, which is justcruisinviera.com, just cruisin' with no G on the cruisin', and then Viera, Viera, or just Google Cruise Holidays of Viera. And all of those different ways allow you to contact us. If we're not in at the time, our hours are a bit limited right now, but we will get right back to you either via email or phone message. So please give us a call, and I can't urge you enough to consider going to Alaska next summer. It is a wonderful place. I tell you, outside of Hawaii, I think it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. Okay, let's look at some of the news on the cruise industry for the week. First of all, Disney Cruise Lines has announced that the Disney Wish that we were anticipating was going to start cruising. This is the first new Disney ship in many, many years. We were anticipating she was going to begin making her debut in early 2022, in January or thereabouts, but that's been pushed back to the summer of 2022. We're expecting it to be out of our port here at Port Canaveral, although that hasn't been officially been announced by Disney. The Disney Wish will be be powered by liquefied natural gas, LNG. Should be about 144,000 tons. She'll have 1,250 staterooms, which is slightly larger than the Disney Dream and the Fantasy, which are the two larger ships currently sailing for Disney Cruise Lines. We don't have too much detail about what the staterooms are going to look like. Disney has not released details about the ship, such as the entertainment, the dining amenities, and how the Wish will be different from the other 4 Disney cruise ships. Whenever Disney brings out a new ship, this is great news because, as you all know, Disney is a fairly expensive cruise lines, and the more capacity they bring on board, that's going to help you, the consumer, by lowering the fares. The reason for the delay of the Wish is because of the pandemic's influence on their shipyard, the Viera shipyard in Germany. They've had to slow down because of the pandemic, as not allowed workers to be there and that sort of thing. So we also got, changing subjects this week, we got another impediment to Carnival Cruise Line's ability to start back to cruising, which is basically unrelated to the pandemic itself. I don't know if you recall, but in 2017, Carnival Corp, and this is the parent corporation of all these different cruise lines, not just Carnival Cruises, but also Holland America, Princess, Seabourn, Costa. These were all underneath the umbrella of the Carnival Corp. And what they did was they had been sued back in 2017 for violations of environmental laws, and it was alleged that they were dumping waste in Alaska, that they were discarding trash in an inappropriate manner on shore, that they had a magic pipe that allowed them to to exit waste off the ship, bypassing the normal filtration system. And so as a result of the lawsuit, they entered into a settlement in southern Florida, and they were basically placed on probation. This all happened in April of 2017. The judge who allowed them to settle the suit to go into probation is a lady named Patricia Seitz, and she's a U.S. District Judge for the Southern District of Florida. And she decreed last week that she is going to determine when Carnival ships can go back to cruising, and she's going to do this, and she doesn't believe it's going to be allowed until 60 days after she approves them being able to go back to cruising. So even if the no sail order is lifted, the Carnival Corp is going to have to go back to Judge Seitz, and they are going to have to provide a certification in 60 days in advance of sailing. So let's say we got the no sail order lifted on November 1st. They could basically not start sailing until the end of December if she maintains the 60-day notification. And she says in her court order, I will determine whether the level of compliance, whether it's appropriate that that ship enter and operate in U.S. waters, she said. So, before ships resume operations, Seitz said she is most concerned about them having the right pollution prevention equipment, critical environmental spare parts, staffing, voyage planning software, and vetting of waste vendors on shore, all things the company has struggled to maintain during its years on probation. In looking at some of the probation things that have been written up, some ships have as many as 700 maintenance items per ship that need to be addressed, the third-party auditor told the court. So, don't know how this is going to play out, but this is, again, another major impediment to Carnival Corp being able to sail again. And then back to my three pillars. Here we're on another story about the CDC. The Democrats really seem to be opposed to sailing. They don't really like for people to have fun to begin with, and I think they consider sailing to be one of them. One of the things I didn't tell you about the CDC, I'm really not sure who appointed the CDC as the arbiter or the agency that was going to determine whether ships could start sailing again. I have never figured this out as to how they got to be in charge. A few weeks ago, you will recall, when we presented our Healthy Sail Panels results and we presented the protocols, we being the cruise industry, because we're all part of the cruise industry, travel advisors are there too. Obviously, our welfare and our ability to make a livelihood depends on the cruise ships being able to sail. We presented the protocol, and at that time there was a meeting at the White House. Well, actually it was virtual because of the president's diagnosis with COVID-19. We presented the protocol, and there were rumors or press reports that the CDC, after receiving this, wanted to shut down the industry, continue the no-sail order until February of 2021. But there were also rumors, and again, none of this has been verified. Again, the fake media loves to do things from anonymous sources. But anyway, there were allegations that the White House Trump administration pressured the CDC to only extend the no-sail order through October 30th versus the February timeframe that they wanted it to happen. And this upset the Democrats because, and here's the stories. This is the way the stories read. Amid allegations, the Trump White House intervened on CDC's no-sail order for cruise industry. The chairman of the subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation, whose name is Sean Patrick Maloney, who happens to be a Democrat from, guess where, New York. I don't know why anybody in New York needs to be questioning anything being done about the coronavirus. But anyway, and so what he said, what he has done is he has now requested more information from the CDC as to how the White House could possibly intervene and overrule the CDC. Now, it was my understanding that the CDC made advice to the Pandemic Advisory Council, which Vice President Pence has been heading up for President Trump. And that it was actually the coronavirus council that was going to make decisions about what was going to happen as far as issues in the United States. Chairman Maloney seems to take issue with that, and he feels like the CDC is in charge of everything and not the U.S. government or the White House. Okay, so he released a following statement about his expanded request of requesting additional documents from the Centers for Disease Control. And he said, these ships shouldn't leave port until we know passengers and crew will be safe and the ships won't again become global vectors of disease. The mistakes made at the beginning of the pandemic cost lives and caused chaos on board these ships. Our investigation into the failure to keep travelers on cruise lines safe continues. If we're going to fight this virus and win the battle, we cannot make the same mistakes and we cannot afford another coronavirus outbreak. He obviously has not looked at the protocols we sent as to do all of these things he's requesting in his statement. I am worried about impairments to the independence of the CDC's science-based and unbiased public health advice based on reported interference from the White House and political leadership at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as well as pressure from the cruise line industry. Well, yeah, we are pressuring because we have demonstrated that we can sail. We can sail safely. We're doing it in Europe every single week. Every week we add more and more cruises, more and more passengers go, and we've not had any outbreaks. He obviously, like most Democrats, only wants to make this a political issue, only wants to make people miserable, and so that they can then blame Trump for being miserable. So, again, I don't know if this is going to have any traction or if it's going to further delay things, but it is out there. All right, let's see. We talked about all of this. Oh, by the way, did you see last week there were some people that got to sail on a Carnival cruise ship in the Caribbean, and they didn't have to have tests or anything else. It was really amazing. What happened was Carnival Sensation was out floating around, one of the ghost ships, as we call them, floating around off the coast of Florida, specifically off of Palm Beach. Doing nothing, which is what our entire fleet is doing worldwide. And when they spotted a small boat with 24 passengers aboard, and they went to the aid of the boat, providing them with supplies, including blankets, life jackets, food, and water to the passengers on board. But when they started providing supplies, the boat started sinking, started taking on water. So they brought the 24 passengers on board the Sensation. Once they got on board, the medical team looked over them, gave them basically physicals, and they quarantined them well away from the crew. So if they did have the Rona, that they wouldn't spread it to the crew on board. The passengers are reportedly of various nationalities and included 2 children. They were later taken ashore by the U.S. Coast Guard, so I really don't know where they came from. Normally, if it's Cubans, they would say it was all Cubans. So there we go. That was the beginning of our sailing. We got 24 passengers on board the Carnival Sensation. Unfortunately, I don't think the cruise ended too well for them because when the Coast Guard picked them up. Last week, we relayed to you about something that's in the testing phase right now, and it's being called the Common Pass, and it's being developed by an outfit called the Internova Travel Group in conjunction with some folks called what is the name of their organization? Commons Project Foundation. Now, this is a nonprofit organization. All of these are nonprofit organizations. And what they're developing, this Common Pass, will be a smartphone app. And this is how it works. Travelers take a COVID-19 test at a certified lab. Their results are uploaded to the Common Pass app, on which they also answer additional health screening questions required by an airline or destination. So a lot of countries, including the state of Hawaii, who now thinks it's another country, but anyway, they have developed these online questionnaires. The questionnaires are basically, have you been in contact with anybody? Do you have these symptoms? You're kind of used to those kind of questionnaires when we go on board cruise ships. So they'll have a test, they'll fill out the health screening questions. Then Common Pass then verifies the traveler has met all requirements to travel, generates a QR code, that's one of those little squiggly lines that you see, that the airlines and border officials can scan. This week they had its first transatlantic test of the Common Pass. Volunteers who were members of the board of the Internova tested it. They were on Wednesday. They were tested for COVID-19 at London Heathrow Airport. Those results were made available in the Common Pass app, and the information was inspected by the airline before boarding and by immigration upon landing in Newark. So what they're hoping is the app could bring standardization to current proofs of negative tests, which are often on paper or in PDFs from a lab that may be unfamiliar to airline or government officials and could be written in a language unknown to the inspector. Common Pass has a single format for test results and only uses certified labs. The utility of the app could in the future be expanded to verify vaccine records for COVID-19 and additional diseases. Remember, I talked about the vaccine may be an important part of this whole thing. Wednesday's flight was the second test of the application since it was developed. A previous test had taken place earlier this month on a Cathay Pacific flight between Hong Kong and Singapore. And one of the participants said afterwards, and I can tell you that as a user, I boarded the airplane knowing that everyone around me had just tested negative. That's a much safer feeling than knowing they're going to quarantine me for 14 days upon arrival. So this is a very exciting event for us, and we'd like to see some scale from it, and it becomes part of the new norm. So that's very encouraging news on this app that we may be all using in the future. Remember the name, Common Pass. Now they may be changing the name as we go along. Well, here's one of the hazards of traveling right now. They're having a bit of a spike in cases in Wales, a little country there near England. And what they did was they all of a sudden decided they're going to lock down the whole country starting on Friday of this week for 17 days. Well, what does that mean to you if you happen to be there taking a tour, or you're in a hotel and you're enjoying the scenery and the sights of wonderful, beautiful country Wales is? If you haven't been there, plan to go. It's a magnificent country, and the people are just absolutely wonderful. So all hotels and other holiday accommodations will be forced to close at 6 p.m. on 23 October, and visitors from outside Wales will be asked to go home. No non-essential travel, including holidays, will be allowed until the 9th of November. So there you are enjoying your vacation, and the government says, get out. So these are some of the things we kind of have to overcome. I will also be very interested to see if this has anything to do with the number of cases in Wales. Well, once again, a reminder that you're on board the Just Cruisin' podcast, and we want to remind you that it's being brought to you by Cruise Holidays of Viera. We would be most honored to be your travel advisor to advise you for your next vacation, whether it's a land tour, a cruise, a luxury cruise, whether it's a trip to Hawaii. We are a designated Hawaii destination specialist, and that's not a designation that someone just threw at us. We had to do a lot of work to obtain that designation, including a very difficult test and a lot of study material. On top of that, Linda and I both lived in Hawaii for a very long time, over 25 years, so we know the islands very well, and we'll be happy to help you plan a vacation to Hawaii, whether it's going over and just staying in a hotel for several days. By the way, Hawaii opened up this week. You're allowed to fly there if you've had a COVID test that's negative within 72 hours of arrival. You don't have to quarantine anymore. The first day they had about 10,000 visitors go under this new program. That shows you again some of the pent-up demand that's happening with the travel industry. But we, again, would like to help you go to Hawaii or anywhere else in the world your heart desires. So please call us at 321-242-1331 or visit us on our website at justcruisinviera.com and or Google Cruise Holidays of Viera, and it'll take you there. All right, back to some of the articles and things that were of interest that came across the old computer terminal this week. I have been almost every week for the last month sharing with you articles written by a lady named Johanna Jane Chill. She is an editor with Travel News Daily or Weekly, and she's done some really good articles. This week, her article is Why More Cruise Passengers Are Choosing Refunds Over Credits. So I'll just read you a little bit of it. Whenever cruise lines have discussed their quarterly earnings with Wall Street analysts this year, they have disclosed a number that before 2020 did not exist. The percentage of guests opting for a cruise refund versus a future cruise credit. Since the beginning of the global cruise shutdown in March, that number has slowly but consistently shifted in favor of refunds. Carnival said on May 14th that 60% of passengers on canceled cruises had taken FCC credits, while the rest requested refunds, so it was 60-40. On September 20th, the number opting for FCCs was 45%, so it had reversed to 45-55. Kind of like looking at the polls for the presidential election. But anyway, Royal Caribbean Group said in May that 55% of the passengers took an FCC, and this month that it was only 50% had taken the FCC, so slight change there, reversed from 55-50 to 50-55. Norwegian Cruise Lines Holdings said on May 15th that slightly more than half of its passengers had opted for a refund, and as of August 3rd, that had changed from 50% to 60% were requesting refunds. Now, the two reasons that she cites in the article for the shift is that fewer future cruise credits, you will have had to have made the final payment or fully paid for the cruise. If you just have a deposit, then you don't qualify for the future cruise credit. So as we've had more canceled sailings and we've had less bookings, we have less people that have fully paid cruises when they get canceled. So a lot of people are only getting their refund, bring a slight premium on your refund, like an onboard credit or something like that, but it really doesn't behoove you to get a future cruise credit for a deposit versus for having paid several $1,000s for a full cruise. So that's one reason. Fewer people have fully paid cruises as we go along. We have more cancellations. That one is definitely, we have people that are on their third and fourth booking. Their original cruise was canceled. They got an FCC. They rebooked for, let's say, July from March or from April. That cruise got canceled. We rebooked them again using their FCC. Now, you don't get another 125% each time, but then we use the FCC again and again and again. And now we're not even sure the new cruise is going to go. So those are basically the two reasons, the uncertainty. Why book a cruise? Because until we know definitely what's going to be happening. I think there's a third reason that's not in the article, and that's people are still a little leery about whether the cruise lines are going to be in business to be able to honor their FCC. So just to be very frank with you, I think they're going to be, but again, that's a worry. It's maybe in the back of your mind, but it is there. Okay, and on a little bit more of a positive note, We have talked about Singapore is going to be allowing, starting in mid-November and December, cruises to nowhere for Singapore residents out of Singapore. And one of the cruise lines that's been approved to do this is Royal Caribbean, and they are going to be using one of their new ships, which is a magnificent ship. I love this ship, the Quantum of the Seas. The Quantum class, if you haven't cruised on that, is a really, really great cruise ship, and it's got all kinds of neat features. We'll talk about that in a future podcast. But anyway, the Quantum of the Seas is one of the ships that's going to be allowed. And here are some of the things that Royal Caribbean is doing on their ship. And it's going to be, I think, a little preview of what we're going to see once we start sailing. And this article says Royal Caribbean has introduced a wide array of new health protocols known as the Royal Promise. So we're going to be hearing things about the Royal Promise in the future from Royal Caribbean. Part of Royal Caribbean's overall plan to mitigate the threat of COVID-19 is to enhance its onboard medical facilities. The onboard medical care offers guests and crew members daily temperature checks, fast and free SARS-CoV testing capabilities on board, complimentary in-stateroom medical evacuations. So that's always been one of the real big knocks. Is if you've ever been to a cruise ship infirmary, you know it's down on the lower decks, down in the bowels of the ship. It's a very small room, and you walk into this small room with a cold or whatever, and there's 6 other people sitting there with the sniffles, and you're going, boy, why did I do this? So what they're doing is either having the doctors come to you in the stateroom, this will be happening what's in the future, or having a telemed type of a session aboard on your cabin TV. So Royal Caribbean this is again the Quantum of the Seas getting and anticipating starting sailing in Singapore. Royal Caribbean has added more doctors and nurses in their shipboard medical centers, enhanced the state-of-art equipment to provide high-quality care. The medical center itself has been redesigned into 2 separate zones, including a dedicated controlled care unit for the management of infectious diseases. Each zone is equipped with its own entrance, critical care beds, restrooms, and lab collections. So they'll be able to quarantine off any suspected cases. And the upgraded medical equipment includes hospital-grade ventilators, cardiac monitor, central oxygen system, nebulizers, defibrillators, and external pacemakers and EKGs. Now, some of this I think they already had, but they're just telling you what all of the equipment's going to look like. Therapeutic treatments, they are going to be able to give you antibiotics via IV. They haven't been able to do this before. That was only done in pill form. They will be able to give you oxygen therapy, which I assume means they're going to have certified oxygen therapists on board. There will be a comprehensive laboratory with a large range of tests, and the results will be provided on board the ship. They won't have to ship them out to a lab. So, in addition, this is something we have talked about. There's going to be what I'm calling a COVID-19 insurance policy. Royal Caribbean will cover any COVID-19 related medical treatment on board, any required quarantine accommodation once off the ship, and travel home up to a value of, I think it's around $20,000. So, and they're including that. That's not an additional insurance. So there'll be a COVID-19 for you. And I think that's really a positive development. Well, before I leave you, I want to, as I always do here on Just Cruising, I urge you to book with a travel advisor, specifically this travel advisor, me, Larry Jackson, Linda Jackson at Cruise Holidays of Viera. But why should you do that? Why do you care about whether you're booking with a travel advisor? Well, for one thing, I can tell you, when you have a canceled sailing, we have been working for basically, what are we coming up on, 6-7 months now, processing, and this is pretty much all we do all day long, and that's processing, monitoring refunds and FCCs and applying FCCs to new future cruises. This sometimes takes us between 3.5 and 4 hours to resolve some of these issues. I'll give you an example. We had a client who had an Alaska cruise canceled. The cruise line, who shall remain nameless, gave him an FCC, a future cruise credit, for 125% of his of a new cruise, the cost of his cruise. They refunded to him his port charges and taxes and gave him the FCC. A few weeks later, they then credited his credit card for a refund of the cruise fare. So they duplicated. They not only gave him the FCC, but they also gave him back his cruise fare on his credit card. Well, the cruise line, in order to resolve this, decided that they were just going to cancel his FCC and allow him to keep the credit he had received on his credit card. Well, as you can see, he lost the 25% premium he got on the FCC because all he got back on the credit card was the original cruise fare. So we are now fighting the battle to get that straightened out, to reinstate the FCC or whatever they want to do, but not to take away. And we, by the way, we had already applied that FCC to a new sailing. So you can see how complicated these things get. And it's really nice to have someone in your corner, such as Cruise Holidays of Viera. I mean, we're having to elevate this up to management at the cruise line in order to be able to get this resolved. And we have spent literally hours upon hours trying to do this. So that's just one example of why you want to book with a travel advisor when you're planning a new cruise. Also, another reason is the expert advice that we can offer to you. Linda and I have been on over 130 cruises over the last 17 years. We read daily the updates from the cruise lines. We monitor what's going on, and we go on the cruises to find out how the cruises. I'll give you another example. A few years ago, one of our cruise lines that we used every year for our annual Military Officers Association cruise, as we traveled on it, each year it got worse and worse, and the service, the food, the entertainment, the ships, the upkeep, all of these things were deteriorating each year as we went on the cruise. And we finally switched cruise lines because it had gotten to the point that we couldn't really feel confident of recommending this cruise line. And we basically stopped selling this cruise line. Now, this happened for a period of about 4 or 5 years. Recently, we went back on this cruise line, and things have greatly improved, and so we are now recommending it again. This is the kind of expert advice you only get from people who get out there and actually do the cruises. So this is just a couple of reasons to choose a travel advisor and choose Cruise Holidays of Viera for your future cruise. Well, that pretty much does it for this week's podcast. We want to thank you so much for being on board with us. We hope you'll come back again next week. I hope when we